Varun Arora, the quiet, polite son of a respected New Delhi family, and Nisha Sharma, the cheerful schoolgirl who vanished without a trace. What no one knew was that her disappearance would unravel one of the most chilling true crime cases the city had ever seen, exposing a cold-blooded killer hiding in his own home. In November 2019, the Aurora family lived in a quiet neighborhood in the heart of New Delhi, a place where the hustle of the city faded into calm, tree-lined streets. Their house stood 3 stories tall, with pale yellow walls and a small front garden where their grandmother tended to marigolds every morning. The family was well liked, respected, and known for their warmth. Neighbors often spoke about their younger son, Varun Arora, a 24-year-old commerce graduate who was polite, helpful, and always ready to lend a hand to anyone in need. Life in the colony was predictable. Children cycled in the evenings, shopkeepers knew their regular customers by name, and residents rarely felt the need to worry about safety. That sense of comfort broke one chilly evening. 14-year-old Nisha Sharma, a cheerful schoolgirl who lived 2 houses away from the Auroras, did not return home after her tuition classes. She had left her coaching center at 6:15 p.m., waving goodbye to friends, and was expected to reach home within 10 minutes. Her parents began to grow anxious when she didn't arrive by 6:45. By 7:00, panic had set in. Calls to her mobile went unanswered. The father began searching the nearby streets, while her mother called relatives, hoping she might have stopped by to meet a cousin. Within an hour, a group of neighbors gathered, forming small search parties. They checked narrow lanes, parks, and even the small grocery store at the corner. It was one of those shops where Nisha would often stop to buy chocolates on her way back. She had not been there that day. By 8:30 p.m., someone found her bicycle lying abandoned near a dimly lit alley about 5 streets away. The front wheel was bent slightly and the chain had come off, but there was no sign of Nisha. The alley was eerily silent, with the flicker of a faulty streetlight casting unsteady shadows on the walls. The police were called immediately, and the first few hours were a blur of questions, flashlights, and desperate voices calling her name. Officers searched the area with the help of local volunteers, moving through construction sites, inspecting parked cars, and knocking on doors. The alley led to a maze of smaller lanes, and each one was combed thoroughly, but the girl was nowhere to be found. News of the disappearance spread quickly. Mothers kept their children indoors, and fathers who normally returned late from work came home early that night. In the Aurora home, Varun stood quietly among the onlookers outside, his expression calm yet unreadable. His parents whispered with other neighbors, speculating whether someone from outside the colony might have been involved. Days turned into weeks, but the search brought no solid leads. The police questioned delivery workers, rickshaw pullers, and strangers seen in the area, but nothing connected. Posters with Nisha's photograph were pasted on walls and bus stops, her smiling face now a haunting reminder of how quickly safety had been shattered. People began locking their gates earlier in the evening, and a strange, tense silence settled over the street. Everyone feared that the disappearance was not a random accident, but nobody dared to imagine the truth hiding so close to home. Just as the search for Nisha was beginning to fade from daily conversation, the colony was jolted by a second tragedy that felt like a cruel echo of the first. It was a Sunday afternoon in late December when the news spread that Meena Gupta, the wife of a well-known shopkeeper, had been found dead inside her own home. The discovery was made by her husband, who had returned from his shop to find the front door locked from the inside. Thinking she might be resting, he had knocked repeatedly. When there was no response, he called neighbors for help. They broke open the door, and what they found inside left everyone stunned. Meena lay on the floor of the living room, her face pale, her eyes open, and a dark bruise circling her neck. A scarf, twisted tightly, lay nearby. Nothing in the house appeared stolen, and the cupboards were untouched. The police arrived quickly, but the method of the killing, strangulation in a locked home, baffled everyone. The incident sent ripples of fear across the neighborhood. People began whispering about Nisha again. Could the same person be responsible for both incidents? The police did not dismiss the possibility, though they said nothing publicly. Their presence in the colony increased, and a patrol vehicle began making rounds late at night. The once friendly atmosphere of the street had turned tense. Neighbors eyed each other with suspicion, wondering if the danger was from an outsider or someone living among them. Only 2 weeks later, the fragile sense of security shattered once more. This time, the victim was a young man named Rohit Verma, who lived in a rented flat on the edge of the colony. He was last seen by his roommate leaving the house late at night, saying he needed to make a quick call in an area with better mobile reception. He never returned. The next morning, his body was found in an unfinished building at the corner of a desolate road. His throat had been slit with precision, and again, nothing valuable had been taken. His wallet was still in his pocket, and his phone was found lying beside him. The crime scene was chilling. There were no signs of a struggle, no footprints, and no witnesses who had seen or heard anything unusual. The 3 victims, a schoolgirl, a shopkeeper's wife, and a young man, had no direct connection. Their ages, lifestyles, and routines were completely different, but one detail tied them together. Each had vanished or been attacked within a few hundred meters of the Aurora family home. It was an observation that some residents quietly discussed, but were too afraid to share openly. The killings did not follow a predictable pattern, and the lack of a clear motive made them even more disturbing. By this point, fear had seeped into daily life. Children no longer played outside, unsupervised. Shops began closing earlier than usual, and some families even considered moving away. The colony, that once felt like a safe, tight-knit community, now seemed like a hunting ground. Somewhere someone was choosing their next target, and no one knew when or who it would be. By the middle of 2020, the police investigation had slowed, but not because the case had gone cold. Instead, it had become more complicated. Detectives were working quietly, combing through hours of CCTV footage from every corner shop, apartment block, and traffic signal within a 2-kilometer radius of the crime scenes. Most of the footage yielded nothing more than ordinary life, people walking their dogs, vendors pushing carts, and residents returning home. But in some clips, a small pattern emerged. In the hours before each murder, the same figure appeared in the background. A tall young man wearing a cap pulled low over his face, often carrying a duffel bag. The shape of the man, his walk, and the timing of his movements all caught the attention of the investigators. Cross-checking the footage, they realized the path he took almost always passed by the Aurora residence. It was a detail that made them pause, but the man's face was never clear enough to make a positive identification. Officially, the police couldn't name him, but quietly, they began keeping watch on the street. Meanwhile, inside the Aurora household, life appeared normal to outsiders. The family continued their daily routines, attending to work, meals, and errands. But behind closed doors, tension had begun to creep in. Amit Arora, Varun's elder brother, had noticed something unsettling. Late at night, when everyone else was asleep, he would hear the faint creak of the front door. On more than one occasion, he had woken to see Varun returning home just before dawn, slipping off his shoes silently before heading straight to the basement. At first, Amit thought it was harmless. Perhaps his younger brother was meeting friends or going for a late night walk to clear his head. But one evening, when a power cut left the basement lights off, Amit went down to check on some old files and saw something strange. In one corner of the room stood a large metal cabinet with a heavy lock, a piece of furniture Amit had never seen before. The rest of the basement was cluttered with old furniture and boxes, but this cabinet looked new, clean, and deliberately placed. When he asked Varun about it later, his brother's answer was curt, almost defensive, saying it was just for work supplies. The unease didn't go away. Amit began paying closer attention. He noticed that on nights when Varun left, the duffel bag he carried would be nearly flat, but when he returned, it would bulge, as if filled with something heavy. Sometimes there were faint stains on the fabric, not quite mud, not quite something he could name. One morning, he even caught a metallic smell drifting from the basement, but before he could investigate, Varun locked the door and left the house. When the police learned of Amit's suspicions, they decided to act without alarming the rest of the family. Disguised as utility workers, they installed a hidden camera across the street with a clear view of the Aurora home. Over the next week, they captured several clips of Varun leaving after midnight and returning before sunrise. Each time, his bag was with him and his clothes were slightly damp, as though he had been near water. The investigation was no longer about whether there was danger in the neighborhood. It was about how close to home that danger truly was. The night of August 14th was unusually stormy for New Delhi. Heavy rain pounded the streets and wind rattled windows across the neighborhood. Most residents stayed indoors, grateful for the excuse to avoid the unease that had settled over the colony in recent months. But for the police, the weather was a perfect cover. After days of silent observation, they had decided this was the night to act. Shortly after midnight, an unmarked vehicle stopped near the Aurora residence. 4 plainclothes officers stepped out, their eyes fixed on the darkened house. They had watched Varun leave hours earlier, the familiar duffel bag slung over his shoulder, and now they were certain this was their chance to search the basement without him knowing. The front gate was unlocked, and the officers moved quickly, guided by Amit, who had agreed to cooperate fully. The basement door was at the far end of the ground floor hallway, painted the same color as the wall, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. It was locked as always, but the police had brought tools. The sound of the lock snapping open was muffled by the roar of the rain outside. The staircase leading down was narrow and steep, lit only by a single dangling bulb that swung gently, casting long, shifting shadows on the walls. A damp, metallic scent grew stronger with every step. At the bottom, the officers found themselves in a low-ceilinged room that felt far colder than the rest of the house. The concrete walls were bare, except for a large corkboard covered in photographs, dozens of them showing people from the neighborhood. Some were candid shots of children playing, others of shopkeepers, neighbors, and strangers passing by. A few had red ink circles around their faces with dates scribbled underneath. On the far side of the room was the metal cabinet Amit had described. Breaking it open revealed a collection of disturbing items: Nisha Sharma's school bag, still containing her neatly stacked books, the gold bangles that Meena Gupta had been wearing on the day she died, and Rohit Verma's mobile phone, its screen cracked but still functional. Alongside them were smaller objects: a child's hair clip, a set of keys, a pair of spectacles whose origins the officers could not immediately identify. In the center of the room stood a stained wooden table, its surface littered with notebooks filled with cramped handwriting. Page after page described what appeared to be Varun's thoughts, fantasies, and detailed plans for each killing. Some entries read like journals, others like step-by-step manuals. The words revealed a twisted obsession with cleansing. The colony of people, he believed, were tainted in ways only he could see. Against one wall, covered by a dusty tarp, the officers found a soundproof cubicle made from plywood and insulation foam. Inside, the space was barely large enough for a person to stand. The floor was sticky, and a faint smell of decay lingered. This was more than just a hiding place, it was a private chamber for his crimes. By the time the officers emerged from the basement, carrying the evidence in sealed bags, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. The neighborhood was still asleep, unaware that one of its most trusted residents had been unmasked. Before dawn, Varun was intercepted on a side street as he made his way back home. The duffel bag he carried that night was heavy, its contents later revealed to be a rope, duct tape, and a kitchen knife, the tools of a man preparing for his next victim. In the days following his arrest, the details of Varun Arora's double life began to emerge, each revelation more disturbing than the last. At first, the news spread in hushed whispers, with neighbors struggling to believe that the polite, soft-spoken young man they had known for years could be capable of such brutality. Families that had shared meals with the Auroras, invited Varun to weddings, and trusted him around their children now found themselves questioning every interaction they had ever had with him. The shock was not just about the crimes themselves, but about how convincingly he had hidden his true nature. During interrogation, Varun spoke without emotion, answering questions in a calm, measured voice. He admitted to each killing without hesitation, describing them not as acts of rage, but as deliberate decisions. According to him, the people he targeted were corrupting the neighborhood not through criminal acts, but in ways that existed only in his mind. He believed that Nisha was becoming too friendly with boys, that Meena Gupta was manipulative toward her customers, and that Rohit Verma was dishonest in his business dealings. None of these claims had any basis in reality, but in Varun's twisted view, he was delivering justice. Investigators pieced together a timeline of his actions. They discovered that Varun had been nurturing these ideas for more than a year before his first murder. He had started by secretly following people, photographing them, and writing about them in his notebooks. Over time, his obsession deepened, and the idea of removing them became, in his words, an obligation. The basement had been carefully prepared as both a planning space and a storage area for his trophies. The soundproof cubicle was likely used to restrain victims or for rehearsing the methods he would later use. The psychological assessment concluded that Varun suffered from a severe personality disorder with obsessive, compulsive traits, but he was found fit to stand trial. The courtroom was packed during the hearings. The prosecution presented overwhelming physical evidence: the belongings of the victims, DNA traces found in the basement, and the chilling handwritten notes. The defense attempted to argue mental instability, but the organized nature of his crimes, the methodical planning, and the steps he took to avoid detection made it clear that Varun was fully aware of his actions. When the verdict was read, the atmosphere in the courtroom was tense. Varun was found guilty of all 3 murders and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. He showed no visible reaction, merely standing as if the words were of no consequence to him. Outside the courthouse, the victims' families expressed relief that justice had been served, though no sentence could undo their loss. Back in the colony, the Aurora family withdrew from public life. They eventually sold their home and moved away, unable to bear the constant stares and whispers. The house remained empty for months, its windows shuttered, the garden overgrown. Even years later, residents spoke of Varun in low voices, as if saying his name too loudly might invite the darkness back. What frightened them most was not just that a killer had lived among them, but that he had hidden in plain sight, smiling and blending in, while quietly deciding who would be next.